Welcome, everyone. My name is Robbie Duda, and I am the lead for the Money and Politics study group for the Washtenaw County League of Women Voters. We have a meeting on the first Thursday of every month at 7 o'clock. And tonight we have with us Ed Golembiewski, who is the Director of Elections for Washtenaw County. And I'm going to turn this over to him right now. You got it, Ed.
Thank you very much, Robbie, and thank you to everybody. I appreciate the invitation to come and speak with you all tonight. I do have a slideshow that I normally provide to Campaign Finance Committee treasurers. I'm going to make it an abridged version. I'll probably move through the slides fairly quickly. But part of my goal was to just kind of hit the main points of the Campaign Finance Act and just sort of explain how it's administered locally here in Washtenaw County, and for that matter at the county level everywhere in the state, and then touch briefly on the state level. Most of the work certainly all of the campaign finance work that I'm involved in is at the county level. Basically what that means is offices from the countywide officers like clerk register, the sheriff, prosecuting attorney, all the way down to villages or school boards and et cetera. So the offices, I guess quote unquote above those state rep on up, file at the state and not at the county. That's not to say that I'm not familiar with the rules and laws that those folks have to follow. But basically, what I'll be talking about today is committees or our committees that file at the county level and that we work with regularly. So the role of the county clerk's office in administering the Michigan Campaign Finance Act, essentially we make available to the public filings that are required by the act, and there are a lot of filings required of the committees that are registered at the county, and the essentials are that any candidate who is going to run for office has to create a campaign finance committee, and again, I just kind of described those that would file with us, but basically every office, with a few exceptions, the candidate has to create a campaign finance committee. And then in a lot of other cases, political committees, ballot question committees have to be formed when a certain amount is spent to influence, elections that involve ballot proposals or that are essentially efforts to nominate or elect individuals that are not being, run in coordination with the candidate themselves. We are involved with notifications. We essentially, provide an avenue to make sure that the public can understand who is contributing to these committees and what these committees are spending money on that they're receiving. We are allowed to notify and essentially require corrections to filings that are submitted to us that we review and find an issue with. We have the ability to levy late filing fees if reports go unfiled that are required to be submitted to us, but we do not have the authority to investigate violations of the Campaign Finance Act. And this is a point that we have to explain fairly regularly when folks call us and say, I think that there's something wrong. Somebody did something that I take exception to. There was some violation. They didn't tell me who was paying for this item that I got in the mail. All of those are valid concerns, but complaints about violations of the act must go to the Michigan Bureau of Elections. So we basically do everything short of investigating those complaints. The database where you can find all of the documents submitted by the various committees dating back at least a decade is at washtenaw.org/campaign finance. That is the county database. Of course, there's a separate state database, and I'll probably show you an example of how to search that, as well as the county database a little bit later on. There are essentially 4 different committee types that register in the state of Michigan, and 3 essential types that register at the county level. At the county level, we essentially deal with candidate committees, political or independent committees, depending on how they are registered, and ballot question committees. Political party committee is also registered, but that's done at the state level. Again, any candidate running for just about any office, with a couple of exceptions, has to create a committee, and a candidate is considered a person that files a fee or an affidavit or a nominating petition to appear on the ballot. It also includes write-in candidates, anyone nominated at a convention, and anyone who spends or receives money to further their nomination or election to office. Even if someone spends only money out of their own, bank account, they still have to create this candidate committee. And an office holder who is the subject of a recall vote is also technically a candidate and has to meet all of the different requirements of the law. The exceptions, like I mentioned, precinct delegates. This is a precinct level office. Those are not considered public offices, and those persons are exempt from having to create a candidate committee and file campaign finance paperwork, as are those running for federal office. That would be filed at the Federal Election Commission. Candidates for Indian tribal government or private organizations, essentially labor unions, and school board candidates where the district has less than 2,400 pupils. And that would mean here in Washtenaw County, you will not see candidates filing campaign finance paperwork in Manchester School District, Milan School District, or Whitmore Lake Public Schools. The statements that are owed by the committees that register with us, and specifically candidate committees, every election that the candidate is going to participate in, if they spend or receive in excess of $1,000 during the course of that election, they have to file a pre-election statement and a post-election statement. And then in years in which they are not running for office, they have to file quarterly campaign finance statements and annual campaign finance statements as well. So it all adds up quite a bit. If the candidate doesn't have a reporting waiver, which would be allowed if they weren't expecting to receive or spend more than $1,000, they do have quite a few filings to submit to the county. Political groups also have to register, and these are folks that receive contributions or make expenditures to influence voters to vote for or against the nomination or election of a candidate. Those that receive contributions or make expenditures to influence voters for the qualification or passage of ballot questions, or make independent expenditures to influence voters that are not in coordination with any candidate committee, or receive contributions or make expenditures to assist a political party in qualifying for ballot access in the state. There's 2 different types of political committees. There's the traditional political committee, and then there's an independent committee. Both types register at the county level, and you would find records related to them in our repository. The essential difference is that independent committees can meet certain criteria to be able to contribute to candidates at levels that are 10 times higher than those of a political committee. And there's, again, there's criteria in place that have to be met. The committee has to be registered with the county at least 6 months prior to being able to do this. They have to receive contributions from at least 25 people, and they have to make expenditures to support or oppose at least 3 candidates in the state. And if they meet those criteria, then they can contribute at much higher levels than other types of committees can. And these, again, are contributions to candidate committees. Ballot question committees is the last type. These are specifically organized to support or oppose ballot questions. And they basically can take money from anybody in unlimited amounts, with the exception of funds from corporations, labor organizations, domestic dependent sovereigns, and Detroit casino interest holders. In all cases, when folks are registering a committee, they have to submit a statement of organization to the county. And when you're searching our records, you would find this in every case where you find a candidate ballot question or political or independent committee, you'll find a statement of organization that states the basics for the committee: the treasurer, who the committee is organized to support or oppose, which financial institution is keeping the funds, and a few other ways, or a few contact methods to get a hold of the committee. They have to be filed within a certain period of time, and if the statement is not, then there is a late filing fee that's owed by the committee, and they still have to file it eventually. The reporting waiver can be gained by any committee, again, that does not expect to spend or receive in excess of $1,000 over the course of an election. And the reporting waiver can be regained if it's lost. So when you're looking at our records, you might find a committee is registered at the county level and has submitted a few filings, but then stopped at some point because they amended their committee and placed the reporting waiver in effect. And this is essentially going on the honor system. If the committee declares to the county that they don't expect to spend or receive in excess of $1,000 over the course of the election, we take them at face value and they are granted the reporting waiver. In Michigan, the administration of the Campaign Finance Act in many ways relies upon the good faith efforts of the committees to properly disclose their activity. And when a committee ends up losing the waiver, meaning they did spend or receive more than $1,000, they have to immediately begin filing statements, be that the pre-election statement, the post-election statement, a quarterly statement, or annual, whatever the next upcoming statement is. And that statement would need to describe all of the activity that had occurred up to that point, including whatever the contributions were that resulted in the loss of the reporting waiver. Campaign statements must be filed in a timely manner, and if they are not, there are late filing fees associated with that. In addition to late filing fees, candidates, if they fail to file a required statement, the next time that they go to run for office, when they fill out an affidavit of identity, they would need to declare under oath that they are in full compliance with the act. And if they are not, for having failed to file a report or for failing to file a late filing fee, they would be disqualified from the ballot. And we so far have not really had to rely on that stick here in Washtenaw County over the last several years, but it remains one that we would have to wield essentially if we did find that a candidate tried to file for office with these issues that they had failed to meet all of the Campaign Finance Act requirements. They would essentially be disqualified from the ballot if necessary. This slide shows all of the various dates and deadlines associated with the filings. It's quite complicated, and I'm not going to go through all of it. But again, the essentials are that if the committee is active during an election, they have to file a pre-election and a post-election statement. And then in the off times, they would have to file quarterly statements and annual statements. Again, they could have the reporting waiver in effect, which would mean they don't have to file all of those different statements. But assuming that they don't have the reporting waiver, these are the statements involved with running for office or maintaining a ballot question committee or PAC. Late filing fees are assessed based on the number of business days that a statement is late, up to a certain maximum, and it can get quite expensive for committees. There's a maximum penalty of up to $2,000 for committees in certain cases, so it can be quite steep. We try to make a very serious effort at the county level to reach committees well before a significant period of time has elapsed before filing fees are really high, and try to get compliance as quickly as we can. We do a lot of outreach via email, phone. We basically do everything short of showing up at people's doorsteps in order to try to make sure that they file on time. But you'll notice in our records, in many cases, that we have to send a notice to a committee because they have failed to file a required document. Late contribution reports are also required of committees during certain time periods. These essentially capture large contributions For candidate committees, that means $500 or more from an individual contributor. For other committee types, it's $2,500 or more from a single contributor during the 15 days prior to an election. And those 15 days are a window of time in between when the pre-election statement would have been filed and when the post-election statement would be filed. So it's essentially, a rapid fire notice to the public that a significant contribution has been received by a committee. That's basically a one-off report. The committee would have to submit this statement that says, Jane Doe gave me $501 on the third day before the election, and the public has a right to know that this contribution came in during this late window just before Election Day. When you are looking at campaign statements in our records, you'll find that they have essential components. They should have a cover page that states what type of document it is. Is it a pre-election statement, a post-election statement, quarterly, et cetera, and show the coverage dates, the time periods, basically the open of the books to the close of the books for the time period in question, committee ID number, committee name, treasurer's name. They all have to be signed by the candidate or the treasurer, and then they're submitted. The next component is a summary page that breaks down the summary of all of the contributions, all of the expenditures, all of the debts and obligations of the committee, basically all of the activity that has occurred during the time period that the report is being filed for. The next statement that would be common to find is the contributions or other receipts itemized statement. And this would show basically by contributor the amount of the contribution, the date of the contribution, the name of the contributor, and if it is in an amount of more than $100, the business of the contributor, who employs them, what their employer name and address is. There are two ways that contributions are made to committees. Direct contributions are, essentially providing a check to the committee for a certain amount of money, and in kind. And those would be donations of goods or services that have a certain market value. And the committee, when they're filing a statement, if they show an in-kind contribution, what they would be doing is taking that fair market value of the good or the service and saying that they received it. And that counts towards their overall contribution limit for that individual contributor. So there are, in a lot of cases, you'll notice that, and especially for races like at the school board level and below, there are many cases where the candidate self-funds their committee, sometimes in its entirety, and they will submit a statement that shows, a balance sheet, that summary sheet, and then just has an in-kind contribution itemized statement along with it, because they're paying for everything out of pocket. But even though that candidate is paying for it with their own funds, they still have to disclose the activity. And all of the activity, the contributions that they are making from their own personal funds, are essentially considered in-kind contributions to the committee that's been organized to help their nomination or election to office. So there will be two different types of contribution schedules, the itemized schedule for direct contributions, and then an itemized schedule for in-kind contributions, all listing out the individual contributors and amounts and dates associated with them. The contribution limits that are in place are based on election cycles, and that basically means the day after an election, whenever the last time the term to be elected appeared on a ballot, up to election day, the next time it's going to appear. And once an individual has reached their contribution limit to a committee, that's it for the election cycle until the next one begins. Candidate committees have set contribution limits. So individuals and political committees that are giving money to a candidate have a certain cap on the amount that can be contributed. Ballot question committees and political action committees or independent committees do not have individual limits for contributors. But again, if they are going to be taking money, in the case of a PAC, for instance, and providing it to a candidate committee for their benefit, they can only contribute to that candidate committee up to the contribution limit. And there are different limits based on the office involved, and it's all set and determined by the population of the district. So districts with population of 250,000 and up can receive from an individual $7,150, or from a PAC, or from from a PAC. Independent committees, again, because they can contribute at 10 times the rate of an individual or a PAC, can give up to $71,500 to candidates running for countywide office, for instance. Districts with 85,000 to 250,000 in population, the individual and PAC contribution limit is $2,100, and independent committees can give 10 times that at $21,000. And then districts with population of 85,000 or less can receive individual and PAC contributions in an amount up to $1,050, and from independent committees at $10,500. There are a number of organizations and individuals that are prohibited from contributing money to any sort of committee under the Michigan Campaign Finance Act. Labor unions cannot directly contribute to a candidate committee, ballot question committee, or PAC unless it's through separate segregated funds. Corporations cannot contribute. Domestic dependent sovereigns, Native American tribes essentially cannot contribute. Public body funds or use of public facilities are not allowed to be contributed to a committee. That means that, if someone were running for township office, the township couldn't donate, space in a conference room or something like that if it's not already something that would be made available for free to everyone. You cannot use public funds or public facilities for political purposes. And you can see here there are a lot of other categories on the prohibited contributions list. But the other key thing to point out is that anonymous contributions are absolutely not allowed under the Michigan Campaign Finance Act. Every contribution to a committee has to be attributed to an individual contributor. We see problems with this from time to time. Well-meaning committees will put out, a box in a room for a fundraiser and receive cash in it. Cash contributions are not allowed over $20, and anonymous contributions are not allowed at all. So if they're just putting a box out and not really knowing who is putting money in there or how much they're putting in, can't do that. And that money would have to be essentially forfeited. Now, expenditures, you'll see expenditure schedules. These are payments to vendors, payments to individuals, payments to volunteers in some cases. Any expenditure has to be listed and itemized, and you'll see schedules related to them. There's a specific schedule for expenditures related to get out the vote efforts, for incidental office disbursements. If it's an office holder, they can use their campaign finance committee to pay for certain things related to the office. There are occasionally in-kind expenditures made, but there are individual itemized statements for each type of expenditure that is made by a committee. Committees can go into debt, essentially, or receive contributions that are being loaned to them so that they have an outstanding debt to repay at some point. When debts are owed or owed to or from the committee, they have to be described on a special schedule and attached to the filing. Debts that are incurred that are not forgiven or not repaid have to continue to be reported in every single statement that's filed by a committee until such time that they are forgiven or repaid. And when the debt is repaid, each itemized individual payment on the debt has to be disclosed and to whom it was made. So for instance, if I were to contribute $500 to someone's committee for school board and said, I want the money back, the committee would indicate on their statement that they received a $500 contribution from me as a loan, and then they would add that loan to their debts and obligations schedule and it would remain there on that schedule, filed with every statement until they paid me back or until I said, I forgive the debt, and they would describe it as such. Fundraisers have to be described in a cumulative way based on each event, including the date that the event was held, what type of activity it was, how many contributions or how much was received at the event, and how much was spent to actually hold it. So you'll see that as a special attachment in reports in our database. Campaign finance committees are required to identify themselves when they are printing and distributing paid material. So if a flyer goes out in the mail, or if door hangers are circulated by volunteers, if the committee paid for those materials, they need to identify the name of the committee and the address of the committee on the materials themselves. And there are some other, examples of specific text that need to be included on certain types of paid advertising. But the essentials of this requirement are you can't just, you can't print something and send it out anonymously. It has to be identifiable and traceable back to the committee that's paying for it. There are some exemptions for this too. I'm not going to go through all of them. There are many for things like cigarette lighters, for pens, things that are basically too small to print the name of a committee on and an address. But for the most part, the common items, the common things that are sent out or delivered to voters, they have to have an identifier on them. After an election, campaign finance committees have to do some more reporting. Candidates who win elective office are required to submit a post-election campaign finance compliance statement that's basically signed and notarized and says, yep, we turned in everything that we were required to, we paid all late filing fees that were owed, and we start the office with a clean slate, essentially. Office holders must keep an active candidate committee at all times while they are in office. They can't dissolve it after the election. And they can have a reporting waiver on record if applicable, but they have to keep their candidate committee active for the duration of the time that they are in public office. And if they run for a different public office, they would have to, in most cases, create a new campaign finance committee for that office. And they could use funds from their previous one and transfer them to the new committee. But in all cases, they would have to keep that old committee active for the entire time they hold that office. Committees can be dissolved in a number of different ways. A statement can be submitted after an election, let's say, in which someone lost, and that statement would describe all of the activity that happened during the time period that's relevant. And if there is a zero balance, a fund balance of zero with no debts and obligations owed, if they have spent everything that was contributed to them, they can dissolve their committee right then and there, and they're done. If they win, again, they have to hold that committee active. They can't dissolve it until afterward. If a committee has a reporting waiver on record, meaning that they didn't have to, regularly disclose contributions and expenditures, there's just a single page that they can submit to the county and say we're dissolving the committee, and we move forward from there. There's also some active, or there's some automatic ways that dissolution works. Basically, the county periodically will review our records, and if we find a committee has been inactive for a long period of time, the person or the candidates that were being supported by the committee are no longer in office, and there's a reporting waiver on record, we will administratively dissolve that committee and say, we'll send a letter and say, if you want to stay active, you can, but otherwise we're going to dissolve it because it doesn't appear to be active any longer. So that was the quick run through, and I wanted to make sure there was time for questions and time to show you the county campaign finance database so that you know how to search it, as well as the state database. So I guess I'll stop here and just and ask if you do have any questions or things.
I have a couple questions in the chat, Ed, and if anybody else has a question at this point, please unmute yourself and ask, but let's, in the chat, Harvey asked, are you informed when the Michigan, oops, my chat went away.
When the Michigan Board of Elections is asked to investigate a complaint about possible campaign finance violations in our county, or is that privileged information somehow?
We are not automatically notified of that, although I will say, typically when complaints are filed, folks come to us first. So we're usually referring them over to the Michigan Bureau of Elections. So we're generally aware of them, but I can't say that in all cases.
And then I want to know is, first of all, are all these reports now filed online?
Yes, so the campaign finance database will show every single report that's submitted to our office and shows everything right now dated through at least a decade. We file everything and post them online, but the filing itself, when the committee is submitting it, it can be on paper and has been traditionally up to this point. So what you'll see are a lot of scanned, handwritten pages, which can sometimes be a chore to read through. But some good news on that front going forward this year, and in fact, really just a few weeks ago, the county is implementing a new campaign finance database that will allow for electronic filings. So committees will be able to actually enter data rather than just sharing either a scanned PDF that they're emailing to us or dropping off in person. There's going to be a much greater reporting capabilities with that. Folks will be able to search by contributor in ways that they've never been able to and see cumulative totals displayed in easier ways. It's going to be a lot easier. However, this is still just being launched. So we've got a few committees that have used the system to file electronically so far, and we'll be gaining more as the year goes along. But I would venture a guess that it'll at least be a year or so before most are using that process.
And then second of all, what can a candidate do if some group prints materials or puts media ads out on their behalf without their permission?
Essentially, that would be considered an independent expenditure, not being done in coordination with a candidate committee. They're not prohibited. Anybody can come along and say, I want candidate A to win this thing and spend money to do it. And if it's not done in coordination or with the knowledge of the candidate committee, it's not a contribution to the candidate committee. It's just completely a separate independent expenditure. Those still need to be reported to the county or to the state for certain races, but they are not considered contributions to the committee itself or to the candidate themselves.
We have another, Larry asked, how many committees are typically active in an election year in Washtenaw County?
It varies. This being a midterm year, it will be rather limited. School board candidates, in some cases villages, obviously county commissioner, but the busier and bigger years are when townships are electing their officers. And so every 4 years that those elections occur. So 2024, there are hundreds of filings. There will be hundreds of filings. In 2020, there were hundreds of filings. This year, it's more like dozens.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If so, please unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Yeah, I have another question, please. You went through the concept of a campaign loan too quickly for my mind to cope. There's an individual contribution limit of $10.50 for lower level candidates for contributions, but is there a limit on loans? Could somebody loan a candidate $100,000 at the very beginning of a campaign to get that campaign rolling, and then as contributions come in subsequently get repaid, and so that loan doesn't have a limit, or does it?
No, a loan itself is considered a contribution to the committee. So Oh,
you froze on us, Ed. We're not hearing you, Ed. Oh,
You have his cell number? Can you text him?
I don't. I don't have his cell number. I think you'll have to just pop back in. Boy, this all seems rather loosey-goosey to me for tracking.
Robbie, I imagine did he say he's going to share the database?
Yes, he did.
Okay, okay,
So I see he went back out and he's going to probably come back in.
Yeah.
This has been incredible.
I really like the honor system.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah, Harvey,
With
sure.
no ability to investigate. Oops.
Oops. Well, Harvey, I guess you've got some work cut out for you. Here he
There
is.
he comes.
Lots of us have work.
All right, Ed. I don't know what happened.
I don't know either. Sorry, folks.
Oh, that's
but-
okay. Let me make sure that you're a co-host still.
I think I did it. I lowered my hand and you were gone.
All right. I
I don't know where
see-
I don't know where I left off. I think I was trying to explain that candidates themselves and their immediate family can contribute unlimited amounts to their own committee.
Mhm.
okay.
Ah,
And immediate family is wife, kids, parents.
Yeah, I think it's actually limited to those in the household.
Okay,
All right. I don't see any other questions. And so if you can take us through the database, that'd be helpful.
All
And
right, no problem.
do you know how to get into MERTS?
Yeah,
okay.
I'll start there if it's if that would be helpful. Let me share my screen again here. Okay, so this is the landing page for MERTS, which is the state database. And you can see in the browser window here, it's not the easiest URL to remember, but a simple Google search landing you at the Michigan Bureau of Elections campaign finance page, you can link to this from that. But the essentials here, when you see the search screen, you've got a few different options. You can search by type, and you can search by a committee ID number if you happen to know it, which in most cases you probably would not, or any portion of the candidate or committee name. And that's what you're probably going to use most often. That's what I use most often for the state database and for the county database as well. And then you can say, do I want to look at only active committees, dissolved committees, or all committees that have been registered over a certain period of time? I'm sure that the state doesn't have, dissolved committees, from a certain time period backward. I don't know what the date is, but I'm guessing that dissolved committees in the state records would probably start somewhere around 2000, but I can't say that for sure. So we can search for any portion of a committee name here. We'll just type in Ann Arbor. And we'll find all sorts of different records on that, just broad search criteria. But you can find any particular committee, and the first thing that the system will show you is essentially what is listed on the statement of organization: the committee ID number, the type of filing name, who is involved, the committee mailing address, and the rest of the essentials here. You can then take a look at any documents on file. And in this case, the only document that happens to be on file is a statement of organization itself. So I will try to open it, and it's not going to let me open it, it looks like, because it was created electronically, and this is the record itself. See if I can find one that has some actual statements submitted. Here's Ann Boleyn from Livingston County. And you can see a number of statements filed here, including the most recent statement, which is her annual campaign finance statement. And you can see it in two different ways. Images of scanned documents, if it happens to have been submitted on paper, or the keyed paper-filled data, which is in this case what it is. And when you access it, you can choose to look at the cover page, the summary page, if it existed, which it doesn't appear to, or at least isn't currently allowing me to access it. But all of the relevant statements are there. So that's the basics of MERTS. You can play around in there and search all over the place, and there are hundreds and hundreds of records there. So you'd probably want to be more specific than I just was when you're trying to find the records that you're looking for. I'll move over to the campaign finance system that the county maintains. And this is it. You can go to washtenaw.org/campaign finance to access it. And then there is a link, and the format is very similar to the state's system. You can search by entering the candidate's information, or you can search for a committee name based on any portion of it. So just for example, we'll search for my boss, Larry Kestenbaum, and there are two committees that have been registered for his various candidacies, one for clerk register and one for county commissioner. We'll look at his clerk register committee. You'll see again the details here from the statement of organization, and then you can choose the option here to view campaign statements. And here there are statements dating all the way back to when Larry first filed for office in 2004. The most recent statement is an annual statement here. We'll view it.
Wow.
And what you're looking at is a scanned, copy of something that's been printed and submitted to us. Going forward in the future, there will be a whole lot more committees eventually filing statements like you just saw in the state records, where it's just completely data that's been hand keyed into a database, but not prepared in this way here, where you're looking at a scanned copy of a hand-filled form. So the summary page will break down the contributions for the time period involved. If there were in-kind contributions, it would include the expenditures, any incidental expense disbursements, debts and obligations, and basically, show the balance. What was the beginning balance of this statement? What happened during the time period, and where did it end? So in this time period, Larry, essentially expended $2 whole to wrap up the end of the year.
Wow.
Any questions on that, or are there other committees that you want to dig into and take a look at?
Does a change of treasurer in a committee require a new committee, or it's just a personal replacement personnel?
Yeah, it does not require the creation of a new committee. In that case, a statement of organization would be submitted again, and it would be an amendment to the original, just updating the treasurer's name and information.
Interesting. I have been filing with notes.
Well, this has been very helpful. Very helpful.
Ask one more?
Do you have
Yes.
one, Harvey, you want him to look up?
No. A general question. Is there any database that could tell us what individual in the county is spending the most in contributions amongst all candidates? Can we track a heavy spender?
Yeah, right. That level of reporting is not available just yet, because we've only just now begun, receiving data, in an electronic format rather than relying on all of these PDFs. So you'd have to take a look through individual reports to find that information and, add it up essentially. MLive, I will point out, usually does before major elections at least, will usually summarize campaign finance activity for major races, and usually has a pretty good breakdown of how much is being taken in by those candidates running for high profile offices. But unfortunately, based on the limitations of my office, I just don't have the staff, frankly, to be able to aggregate everything and provide cumulative totals for the entirety of the election cycles yet. But again, moving to this different model of e-filing is going to allow us to do that with a lot more accuracy and regularity.
I'm excited about that. Now, are there, for your level, for what you do for Washtenaw County, are there people across the state that are in your same position? And do you guys get together and have meetings, or is that up to Larry?
So every county in the state is responsible for administering the Campaign Finance Act and publishing the statements that are submitted to the county. Everybody does it a different way, though. You'll find, we've got a website, obviously, we've got a publicly searchable database, and most large counties do. Smaller counties, it's not the norm at all to find documents as readily available. Typically, it involves either requesting the records directly from the county clerk's office or submitting a FOIA request or something like that. But the larger counties all publish information this way. Yes, we do gather together. My title is Director of Elections. There are only so many other, directors of elections around the state, or election coordinators or supervisors or managers. All of us that are, the professional election director types do get together. We typically meet on a bi-monthly basis. We talk about all sorts of things, but especially campaign finance.
Is that a public meeting?
No, they're not. These are typically informal gatherings of us, professional election administrator folks. The county elected officials, the elected county clerks across the state, have an association, an official association called the Michigan Association of County Clerks. They gather quarterly. A lot of us, me included, attend those meetings as well. And those are, much more formal gatherings, conferences, essentially. They're still, they're not public gatherings, but they are higher profile.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Ed, are you involved in election security in any way?
Oh, certainly. We, at the county level, we administer elections in partnership with all of the cities and townships in the county. But we're responsible for programming and distributing ballots. We're responsible for disseminating election results. And in the process of both of those activities, there's a whole lot of security involved in the administration of elections. From ensuring the voting equipment itself, ballot tabulators are thoroughly tested and essentially kept in the hands of only those authorized staff that are allowed to possess them, from making sure that the database and all of the transmission software and various components of election reporting are secure, to a lot of other elements too, including physical security. But yes, the county clerk's office does involve itself quite a lot with security.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that security question. Now, what about the security of actual personnel who are working in, the election inspectors who are going to be working the coming elections and so forth, with what we've been hearing about?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you. I've worked in the polls. Or I've worked as an election inspector, and quite honestly, in the upcoming elections, it isn't just the pandemic, but my concern about actual physical danger to people who are working the polls that kind of makes me hesitate.
I understand the concern. I know, it's a topic certainly that's in the news right now. I can say prior to every major election, really prior to every election, but with heightened, I guess, attention paid to this during major elections, we are very close partners of the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office, who in turn is close partners with all of the local police agencies in the county. We make sure that they understand what we are expecting, and have readiness essentially to deploy deputies or police officers to polling locations if necessary. In elections past, we've had concerns expressed about the possibility of intimidation of voters. Normally, that's the concern. It's this idea that poll workers might be subject to threats is not one that has been as familiar to us, but is one that is now on the radar. But certainly the sheriff's office is ready to deploy deputies. They typically have additional deputies on staff or on patrol during major elections so that they can deploy them quickly if necessary. Fortunately, we have not had significant incidents here in Washtenaw County to date, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to plan for them in the future. But again, I can say that law enforcement is ready to respond to problems at polling locations should they occur, and we'll be having plenty of those planning meetings with our law enforcement agencies this year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, Ed, I really thank you for giving up your evening for us. And this has
My
been
pleasure.
very helpful.
Thank you for having me.
With that, I'm going to end the recording and invite people to stay for the rest of the meeting for those that wish to. And we'll say goodnight to you, Ed. Thank you again for coming.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ed.
Yes,
Take
thank
care.
you.
You're very welcome.